It's me, your long-lost internet friend, the one who talks about cameras and also wallets and stuff for some reason. But I'm back out of the sewer for that monthly upload, and this time around I want to talk about these two cameras right here, the Leica M11-P and the Hasselblad 907X100C. Now, for those of you who have not been watching this season of Toby's Things and are not familiar with the deep lore on this channel, let me get you up to speed real quick. Basically, I've been using a Leica Q2 for 95% of my photography over the past 3 or 4 years or so. And eventually I started craving something new, something that feels similar and is compact and gets me equally as excited. But since that doesn't really exist, I started saving up so that I could eventually buy the next best thing, which is, in my opinion, a Leica M11-P. And so earlier this year, I was finally able to go out and buy one. A few months later, however, something rather unexpected happened for me, because I was approached by Hasselblad, who wanted to do a collaboration on this camera, the Hasselblad 907X100C, and so now I also have that as well. And that is honestly a dream come true, obviously. However, ever since I got the Hasselblad 907X, I've also got a few comments and DMs and so on asking me if that now meant that I was going to sell the Leica M11-P or that I was no longer interested in it. And overall, a lot of people just wanted to know which I prefer, the Leica M11-P or the Hasselblad 907X. And to some degree, that is a question that I've also been asking myself. Now, these cameras are very different in some key areas, obviously, especially if you just look at the spec sheet. However, they are probably still targeted at the same type of customer. Now, again, for transparency's sake, I want to stress that even though this video isn't explicitly sponsored by Hasselblad and it is not part of our collaboration either, that collaboration has ended now, I still got the Hasselblad for free and I paid for the Leica M11-P with my own money, and so there's always a chance that that might affect my judgment in some form or another, even though I do my best to not let that happen. But again, just for transparency's sake, you should probably just know that and keep it in mind. With that said, on a different note, I'm also obviously well aware that these are two incredibly expensive cameras, and gotta be honest, sometimes it just feels odd that I own these cameras and that I'm able to talk about them, because I'm not rich and I'm not necessarily in the right pay grade, let's put it that way, to be able to afford cameras like these. But I do have this YouTube channel, and that allows me to have some extra spare change that I can spend on camera gear. And obviously I got the Hasselblad for free, which is lovely because I don't know if I would be able to afford it otherwise. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, I think that I can give you some good insights on the key similarities but also differences between these two cameras, now having used the M11-P for half a year or so and the 907X for over 3 months. I've taken both cameras on many trips by now, from the Netherlands to Switzerland to different places in Italy and so on. And so let's talk about those similarities and also differences, and let me talk you through which camera I prefer for what use cases and how I'm planning to use them going forward. Okay, so at first glance, and if you're not too familiar with these two cameras, they don't have a whole lot in common other than being incredibly expensive, but I think they are actually competing directly head to head for the same type of photographer. Okay, so let's start with the obvious. Both cameras are made by brands that are kind of the oldest names in the game, and they have a lot of heritage behind them. Both Leica and Hasselblad can certainly claim that some of the most important photos, historically speaking, or some of the greatest art in the photography world has been produced with their cameras. And they are also both made here in Europe. Hasselblad is a Swedish company and the camera is made in Sweden, and Leica is a German company and the Leica M11-P is still made in Germany in Wetzlar. They also both very much lean into the heritage of their respective brands, as both of them are not trying to look like modern cameras at all, but instead they look like slightly modernized designs from the second half of last century. A bit like what Porsche is doing with the 911 or Mercedes-Benz is doing with the G-Class. Both are in a way designed to give you a photography experience that is more similar to shooting film than shooting digital, with the Leica essentially working like its analog sibling, the Leica M11-P, but with a digital sensor. And the 907X is very much on the same track because you are actually able to attach the 100 megapixel sensor straight to your old analog Hasselblad 200 or 500 series camera. You could therefore also say that both cameras, for better or for worse, prioritize form and the experience over functionality, at least to some degree. With that being said, I don't think that it is just a vanity thing. I think there's a lot more to it. And film shooters especially will probably really appreciate those design choices. Because if you have a Leica M6 or a Leica M11-P, you can essentially just use this M11-P with exactly the same lenses natively, and when you're using those cameras, they will feel almost identical while you're using them. And so that makes it really easy to switch in between shooting analog and shooting digital. And the same is obviously also true for the 907X100C, because again, you can just attach that 100 megapixel sensor to your old analog camera and use the exact same equipment, but just shoot to a different medium. In this case, a huge high resolution medium format sensor. And so in short, if you like shooting film, but you also bounce around in between analog and digital from time to time, these cameras are pretty much tailor-made for you, at least if you're in the Leica or Hasselblad ecosystem, and maybe even both. Anyway, despite their vintage looks, both cameras sport very modern, high-resolution sensors. However, unlike most modern photography cameras, these are not hybrid cameras, as neither of them features a video mode. And also, neither of them has an electronic viewfinder. Both do, however, have internal memory, but neither has a second card slot, or IBIS for that matter. And even though both cameras have some degree of sealing and protection against dust and moisture and, let's call it, the elements, neither of them is really designed to be used in extreme conditions. And lastly, both of them are kind of compact for what they are. And so overall, I guess it's fair to say that these two cameras are both highly modern cameras that are kind of dressed up to look and feel like old vintage analog cameras, at least to some degree, and they are probably aimed at the customer or photographer who perhaps values an aesthetic and the experience of shooting photos as much as, if not more than, the actual result of the photography, so the photos themselves. And they are obviously also aimed at a person who is able and willing to pay the luxury price tag. Despite those similarities, though, there are also a number of differences, and so let's talk about those next. Well, first of all, obviously, they are both very different when it comes to the form factor. The Leica is a classic rangefinder styled like its 35mm analog siblings, whereas the 907X is, again, the digital equivalent of a 500 series medium format Hasselblad that is meant to be shot at waist height. The Leica sports a 60 megapixel full frame sensor, and the Hasselblad features a 100 megapixel medium format sensor, which is even bigger and sits at the top of the food chain. The Leica has that true OVF rangefinder, whereas the Hassi has no viewfinder at all, but uses that big tilt screen which can be tilted up for that waist level viewfinder-like experience. Perhaps most noticeably though, the Leica can only ever be used with manual lenses. There is no autofocus here whatsoever. The Hasselblad, on the other hand, has autofocusing and face detection and so on built in. However, there is no continuous autofocusing and there's also no continuous shooting with the Hasselblad either, but again, at least it does have autofocusing if you want to use that. But those differences are obviously merely the differences that you will find on the spec sheet. The real differences in how you use them and how they operate and how you can create art with them are a lot more than just skin deep. In my opinion, those differences actually go straight down to the core of how you use those cameras and what kind of photography they are really made for. Again, both cameras certainly put a huge emphasis on the photography experience, but the type of photography experience that you get with each one of them is very different. Let's start with the M11-P, shall we? Again, it's a classic OVF rangefinder camera, meaning that you are actually looking right through the camera body and only have some frame lines as a reference to enable you to compose and frame your shot. That in turn means that you will have to look directly at your subject while you are taking the shot. And since most Leica shooters also like to shoot with both eyes open at the same time, me included, at least for the most part, there are sometimes challenging situations where you get light directly coming at you where I might squint a bit, but never mind that. If you have both eyes open shooting with this Leica, and on top of that you can see what's going on outside of your composition with those frame lines and the OVF rangefinder, it just gives you a huge advantage to time your shots just right. And especially for stuff like street photography, this can sometimes feel like cheating. It's almost like using a wall hack with your camera. All you have to do is find the composition, pre-focus your shot, or just use zone focusing, wait until the subject enters your shot and take the photo. And in my opinion, that whole process just feels a lot more sophisticated than the modern equivalent, which is often just use the EVF, and as soon as something enters your frame, you just shoot at 30 frames per second and spray and pray basically, and that allows you to get your shot. Now obviously I'm exaggerating here a bit, but I hope you know what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that it is a very enjoyable process and that getting that shot feels a lot more intentional with this camera. Moreover, using the rangefinder also just works great for stuff like people photography, be that actual modeling shoots or in my case just documenting the time that I spent with friends and family. Because with the rangefinder, by definition, you have to look straight at your subject when you want to take a photo. And especially speaking as a dad with a very young kid, it's a lot easier to get your kid to smile for a photo if you are looking directly at them and you're smiling at them. And the same is also actually kind of true for grown-ups as well. And the Leica M11-P itself is also just a very non-threatening camera. I have a lot of friends and family members who do not like to have their photo taken all of the time, and I can certainly understand that. But for some reason, people don't seem to mind the Leica M11-P. And that is great because even though I'm not going to show those photos to you for the sake of privacy, I got a lot of great shots of all types of family gatherings and meeting friends and just memories of our son growing up. And that is a huge thing for me. Now, with that said, the Hasselblad is a very different animal. With the 907X, you're using that tilt screen, and with the way the whole camera body and screen are designed, it really invites you to hold it and use it like one of them 500 series Hasselblads with a waist level viewfinder. This approach to taking the shot is very different because it means you are actually not looking at the scene or at the person you are taking a photo of at all. In fact, you are not even looking in their direction, you are looking down at your screen. This can in some cases be a drawback or a disadvantage, especially if you're trying to take photos of your kids and you want them to smile for those photos. But on the other side, in other situations, that can actually be a huge advantage as well. Composing your photos this way allows you to completely remove yourself mentally from the scene and focus solely on what the camera is seeing. And also for those times when you don't want to have a reaction from your subject and you really want to get that candid moment, that is actually, in my experience, often a lot easier with the Hasselblad for that very reason. Because you're not looking at a person, you're looking down at your camera, at your screen. And most people seem to notice, obviously, when you're looking at them. Human beings have evolved, I think, to some degree to notice when somebody is looking directly at you. And that is probably particularly true when somebody is also pointing a camera at you. You will notice that even if it's going on somewhere in your peripheral vision. However, on the flip side, we don't really seem to notice people who are just looking down. Most people are kind of looking down nowadays, mostly on their phone, but people who aren't facing us or looking in our direction are probably just registered as non-threatening by our monkey brains. And so that means that if you want to get that candid shot, be that in street photography or just, again, taking those pictures of your friends and family, using the Hasselblad the way it's intended to be used from like a waist height position is actually often a lot easier, because in that sense it is just a bit stealthier. Now lastly, and somewhat surprisingly to me, the Leica actually feels faster to use for me than the Hasselblad. I genuinely think that using manual focus actually works really well for most situations, unless you are trying to track something like a fast-moving object with your aperture wide open. The Leica itself is of course smaller and lighter, and therefore it feels more nimble than the Hassi. It's easier to just sling around your neck as well on a strap, and you just hold it up to your eye, maybe slightly adjust the focusing, or you just leave everything as is and use zone focusing, and you just take the shot. It's quick to turn off, good stuff, and again 60 megapixels on a full frame sensor already gives you tons of details and resolution to work with. With that said, don't get me wrong, the 907X is certainly no slouch either. First of all, again, it's surprisingly compact and also faster than I expected a medium format camera of this type to be, but still it's bigger than the M11P, and if you're booting it up from off, it might take a few seconds. So if you know that you're going to use it, but you just want to conserve some battery, just put it on standby and it will be ready to shoot in an instant. It can also sometimes just take a short moment to get ready to get the shot, because you're not running around looking at your camera facing down with the screen tilted up. More often than not, you will probably see something that you want to take a photo of, and then you decide to, oh, alright, I've got to get my camera ready. I might have to turn it on first, then I flip up the tilt screen, get it down, then I have to start framing my shot, and so on and so forth. And so it's not an unreasonably slow process. I don't feel like I've missed a lot of shots, not at all with this camera, but again, it feels a bit slower, just ever so slightly, than the Leica M11P, where you just see something and you just raise the camera to your eye, adjust the focusing accordingly, and you get that shot and you're done. But then again, in some way, it can sometimes certainly be worth it to take that extra moment to use your Hasselblad, because with the Hasselblad, you get that insane amount of detail, the color fidelity, just the overall look of the images. It is something else. It is hard to put into words. You really have to use it. You have to edit those files and take a closer look at them on a big screen in full resolution to be able to fully appreciate the quality that you get. And again, I say that knowing full well that a 60 megapixel full frame sensor probably already offers more than enough resolution and detail for the vast majority of photographers out there, me included. But again, if you've ever worked with those files, if you ever had the chance to really appreciate them in person, it is nice. There's just no way around it. It's just nice. It's almost twice the resolution, and again, 60 megapixels is already kind of overkill. And then there are also little differences, like being able to use the X-Pan crop with the Hasselblad right then and there in your camera, which allows you to frame your images in a very unique and quote-unquote cinematic way, while still getting a shot with roughly 50 megapixels worth of detail. With all that being said, where does that leave us? Which camera might be right for you, and which camera will I use going forward? Well, this is a tough one, because I don't think there is a correct answer here. I don't think there's a clear winner, so to speak. At least in a sense, because no matter which way you go, you will get a camera that is incredibly fun to use and that will most likely be at your side for many, many years to come. I think it will be a good while before those sensors can be considered outdated. And so either way you go, you will end up with a phenomenal camera and you will certainly enjoy using it for many years to come. For me personally though, luckily I don't really have to decide because I have both and I will just keep both and keep using both. And I really do mean that because I have brought both cameras at the same time in my camera bag on many trips over the past few weeks and months. That said, in my personal day-to-day life, I usually stick with the M11-P for the simple reason that it's that bit more compact and it's also a bit lighter. And also, not gonna lie, I do have multiple lenses for the Leica M11-P, and so I'm able to bring it with the 28mm and 50mm. And for the Hasselblad, sadly right now I only have the 55mm lens, which is a great lens. I love it to bits, but it will probably be a while before I will be able to buy another Hasselblad lens. And so for now I'm stuck with this setup. I pretty much use it like it's a fixed lens camera right now. And so with the Leica M11-P and multiple lenses, I obviously do get a bit more versatility. And that's also an advantage of the Leica M system, at least to some degree. You can obviously adapt older and perhaps cheaper glass to the Hasselblad, and you can certainly also spend tons of money on modern brand new Leica glass for the M11-P. However, with brands like Voigtlander and others, it is just very easy to buy a brand new lens with tons of character and good performance overall for a reasonable price, because again, those Hasselblad lenses and that Leica M glass, they are really a hit to the wallet. The 907X then is therefore the camera that I like to break out for those more special occasions. For me, it feels a bit like having that very special, expensive and exotic car in your garage that you want to take out from time to time to drive it on that perfect Sunday morning. Again, it's not reserved for those special occasions only. I do use it in my day-to-day life as well, but not quite as often as the M11-P. And also the way it's designed and the way you use and operate it, it just feels like something that should perhaps used a bit more ceremoniously, and it doesn't feel as casual, if you like, as the M11-P does. In conclusion then, again, there's just no real winner here for me. Both cameras are very similar, yes, but also very different and uniquely enjoyable in their own respective ways. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to using both of these cameras a lot more going forward, and I hope that you are interested in seeing more of these cameras going forward, because they will be featured in many, many more videos to come. However, that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was interesting to you, and I will see you in another one. Until then, take good care. Bye.